Welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. I'm the producer, Caleb Keith, and I'm joined by our hosts, Doctors Rod Rosenblatt, Scott Keith, and Adam Francisco. Follow these great minds as they answer pressing questions about theology, history, and apologetics. This show is brought to you by 1517 The Legacy Project, serving to proclaim the gospel to all people, especially those broken by the church. Welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. I'm the producer, Caleb, and I'm joined as always by Doctors Rod Rosenblatt, Scott Keith, and Adam Francisco. And today we're doing a bit of a transition episode. Last time we talked about vocation on the show. We said it was going to be our last regularly scheduled Loshi topic. That doesn't mean we're not going to hit any of those topics any further, especially since we asked you, dear listeners, to send us some suggestions for some doctrinal topics that we maybe skimmed over or that you'd like to hear covered more thoroughly. But today we're moving into a subject that I think everybody's excited to get to because we have three apologists around the table, and we're heading into a section on apologetics for our show. And so today we kind of want to do something that we didn't get the chance to do with the Lochi episodes. We started the show back in, the last week of January, and we wanted to jump right in, get people listening to the show, make sure to get people excited and not lose attention or anything. So we didn't spend an episode explaining what Lochi meant or what we were referring to with Lochi topics. We did that a bit. We spent a significant chunk of time actually in the last episode on vocation talking about that since it was the last one. So people who had jumped in mid-show or that was their first episode or something like that can get a feel for what we were doing in the past and can get an idea about going back and listening to the old episodes. So today we're going to move on a little bit, and we're going to explain what's to come for the Thinking Fellows throughout the next probably couple months. So, Dr. Keith, you want to swing us into this introduction on apologetics?
Sure. As we were wrapping up the series on, I guess it was a series on the Lochi, Dr. Francisco and I sat down over a couple of beers and we sort of sketched out an idea for two more series that would get us through at least the rest of this year. The first one was a series on apologetics, and basically today we'll take some time and we'll explain what apologetics is, what we mean by that, just sort of the approach that we'll take as we head into teaching about apologetics. So that'll be the first series. The second one, I don't think we have a catchy name for, but it's basically like the heroes of the faith, where we'll go through some individuals throughout the history of Christianity who have greatly influenced the promotion of the proclamation of the gospel and have been great gospel proclaimers themselves. And we'll just discuss sort of their history and how they influenced Christianity and the church and the world, and kind of a more historical approach to theology. But the listeners should be aware that we tend to grab available guests when we can and sit them down in the chair and talk to them about their thing, just because we feel like we don't want to miss the opportunity when they're around. Like we have Pastor D'Onofrio here, who's a missionary, so getting him in the chair and talking to him about missiology is an opportunity we don't want to miss, and we plan on continuing that in the future. So listeners can look forward to sort of interruptions to the series. We'll just call them special episodes or special guest episodes when they come up. We also planned in some special episodes for different occasions in the church year, like Christmas and Easter and Advent and Lent and that type of thing, just to explain. Because within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, we actually follow the church calendar pretty closely, and so we thought it might be worthwhile as we're entering these different seasons to sort of stop and at least for a few minutes during the show explain what's going on and why we celebrate Advent and that type of thing, and Christmas and Easter and Lent. And so probably not too much time, but enough to sort of get the listener up to speed on where we are. And that's it. So today is basically an introduction to apologetics.
Yeah, and so before we jump right in, I just wanted to mention it's blazing hot here down in Southern California
I think we're
right now.
95 today.
And so if you hear a hum or a buzz in the background at all, That is our fans. Yeah, those are necessary, so I'm sorry for the buzz, but the fellows will die if we don't have that moving air right now. So we apologize for a slight buzz if that is ringing in your ear a little bit this episode.
If we didn't have it, we wouldn't be recording, though.
Yeah, it would be it'd be done. So we're going to jump in there, but also make sure to check out the show and past shows on thinkingfellows.com. Over there we have a bunch of links to the different breaks that we take. If you've listened to the show before, you know we take about a mid-episode break to highlight either a book or a project from 1517, the Legacy Project. If we have guests on, we usually give them the break to talk about something that they're involved with too, so you can find out a lot of cool things over at the website there. The show notes are a brief explanation of the episode, and then links to a bunch of stuff. There's books that 1517 the Legacy Project publishes and sells, but we also promote any books that we feel are relevant to a topic and come up during the show. And I put direct links to their various spaces on the Amazon store there. So that's what the website does. It just gives you a chance to interact with what we're thinking about a little more. And don't forget to check out the donate button. The Thinking Fellows is supported by 1517 The Legacy Project, which is a nonprofit Christian organization. And the show survives via listeners who donate and who support the show. And so now we have...
Paid for by listeners like you.
Yeah, paid for PBS style. And so there's a new donate tab at the top of the Thinking Fellows website there. And those donations still go through 1517 The Legacy Project. They are still our parent organization. And you're going to get an email coming from them, confirmation that you donated to 1517 The Legacy Project. But when you donate on the Thinking Fellows website, those funds are designated to our project. And that helps me produce the show, that helps keep the website running, that helps keep our podcasts pumping to various podcasting apps.
And pays for equipment.
Yep, pays for equipment. It does all sorts of things throughout the year. And it's just really a great help when we have that. We get regular donations. We have a couple people who've signed up for monthly donations to the show, so we really thank you for that.
Absolutely.
So if you're listening, we really do appreciate that. We're not forgetting you out there. We're very happy to record the show, and we're happy that we get to continue to record the show and bring you our next series. And
also remember to like us on Facey page and and tell your friends to do all that sort of thing.
Facebook and Twitter.
Facey page is Facebook?
Yeah.
So let's go up there. And then one other thing, a lot of people, so I would say probably 80% of listeners are subscribed to the podcast via iTunes or some other podcasting app. And if you're somebody who kind of listens, let's say like you see it on Facebook when it goes up on Friday or on Twitter or something like that, and you click it as it listens, come through, and you enjoy the show, I would suggest to you to subscribe to that. That way you're not missing episodes. Sometimes things go wrong with Facebook, or I get the show up late on an afternoon because of something like that.
I need to do that.
Yeah, subscribe to your own show. Yeah. And what that does is just ensures that you don't miss an episode. And it's easy if you have an iPhone. There's a podcast app built into it that's separate from your music and iTunes app there, and you can search Thinking Fellows and hit subscribe. There's a bunch of other podcasting apps. I always suggest to people it's called Overwatch Radio. Or I'm sorry.
Are they going to pay us for this advertisement?
Overcast Radio. No, they're not going to pay us, but it's an easy podcasting app, and it also has an audio booster for riding in your car. And we know
that's nice.
We know a lot of people listen to podcasts in their car, so
right, yeah, that's good.
So if you need that kind of feature there, Overcast Radio, that's a free app, and the guy over there provides all the services for free, and he's also donation based from users to support that as well. We're also available on a couple bigger podcasting apps like Stitcher Radio and things like that.
Don't forget Pirate Christian Radio.
And Pirate Christian Radio every Wednesday. You cannot necessarily subscribe to that, but you can catch the live feed if you're listening throughout the day on Pirate Christian Radio. We're Wednesday mornings and Wednesday night, because when their regular scheduled stuff goes, it restarts for the day. So we have that traffic slot in the morning on Wednesdays.
Good on Chris for
absolutely
sponsoring.
Yeah, no, it's great. What they're doing over there is great, and we're really happy to be part of the Pirate Christian family.
That's right. Maybe next year they'll invite us to the conference.
Dude,
I was really proud of Adam last night, by the way. Adam and I went to a lecture by General
Michael
Flynn, which was wonderful, right, Adam? And Adam was interviewed by the Orange County Register.
Oh.
All right. And he plugged the podcast to the Orange County Register.
Yeah.
All right.
Clapping all around.
They'll probably edit that out.
Yeah, probably.
Probably. I think next time, though, just introduce yourself. Dr. Adam Francisco,
Host of the Thinking
professor
Fellows
of history and Islamic studies, as well as host of the Thinking Fellows podcast. Then they have to put it in there.
They will too, because that's believe it or not, podcasting is kind of a big deal nowadays. There's podcasts that are as big as some radio shows out there, some popular radio shows. It's really
We should have our listeners tell all their friends to like it.
Well, really, you should.
I just did. Remember the face page?
Yeah.
Thing. Yeah.
You can, if you go to our Facebook page. I know this is awful, and your friends probably don't need more stuff in their inbox.
Yes, they do.
But do it anyways. You can go to our Facebook page, and on the top left corner there's an invite button, and you can invite all the people you would like.
Really?
To go like our Facebook page. We are climbing fast on Facebook too. We are now like over 750 likes on Facebook. Which is really small compared to the amount of downloads. So I know there are a lot of people listening right now who have not liked us on Facebook yet.
It's not successful till we have more likes on Facebook than Rod has friends.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, that's not. Yeah, that's gonna be. Rod gets probably like 40 friend requests a day.
Really?
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's pretty.
Popular.
How do you know that? Oh, just kidding. Moving on.
Moving on. So why don't we actually get on topic a little bit? This episode is about the show in general, and so we are moving into our next section. So when we're talking about apologetics, maybe not everybody, I know we all certainly know what we're talking about here, but maybe not everybody knows what we mean when we say apologetics. So what's the real skinny basic on that?
Well, I wanted to start out by saying this is kind of exciting for me because maybe Adam too. When I was at Concordia, Rod's apologetic sort of slant in the way he taught, and implicitly and explicitly, and even in your apologetics class and your philosophy classes, was what first sort of drew me to wanting to know more, not only about the subject and about theology, but about you and your approach and how you learn this. And then after that to Dr. Montgomery and going to study at the Apologetics Academy in France, which we should advertise too. The Apologetics Academy in France with Dr. Montgomery.
And Craig Parton.
And Craig Parton. So it was, this is exciting to be able to do a show with you about this. And really, Caleb described me as an apologist, and I guess I'd agree with that. I do teach this occasionally as we go out. But in my mind, I'm in the room with a couple of greats on the topic. I mean, Adam probably won't toot his own horn, but he was it associate professor of apologetics at Concordia Fort Wayne for...
Assistant or visiting. Visiting and then assistant, yeah. Close enough.
It was a real deal here.
And it was first for a century in either one of our seminaries.
Right. And so this is, for our listeners, they may not understand what a unique opportunity this is to have two legit Lutheran apologists and one hanger-on, at a table with microphones on, trying to say, hey, this is something we should know. And here are some basics that can kind of get you started, because it's in our world, in the Lutheran world, this is a very rare thing.
Yep.
I mean, I can think of you, Adam, Dr. Montgomery, and some other guys that you've trained. But the connection beyond you and Dr. Montgomery, and then those you've influenced doesn't go very far.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And there aren't any really that I'm aware of outside of that are sort of doing serious work on this.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to Caleb's question, what is apologetics? What's the basics of this topic? What are we talking about when we say apologetics?
All right. First of all, the key verse is 1 Peter 3:15. But always be prepared to give a reasoned defense to anyone who asks you for the reason that the hope is within you, yet do it with gentleness and meekness. It's an imperative, a grammatical imperative to all Christians. Be prepared to answer the non-Christian's question, why do you believe the gospel is true? The classic was Socrates. He had to give an apologia, and he had to have character witnesses because he was charged with corrupting the youth. There's your parallel, secular parallel. This means that the English word apologize is almost exactly the opposite of the classical Greek. It's the opposite of apologizing that we're Christians at all. The classical is what we have to opt for. The setting is somebody on trial, and the bringing of arguments in defense of that guy who is on trial. In the earliest years of Christianity, this was done to Jewish audiences on the basis of Jesus being the legitimate promised Messiah and using Old Testament texts to do it. And in Gentile audiences, it was done on the basis of arguments from miracle. Both the ones in Jesus' ministry done at will over nature, disease, and everything else, but primarily culminating in his resurrection from the dead. Now, he started to talk to his disciples before he went to Jerusalem, knowing what was going to happen, and the disciples were utterly clueless. I would have been clueless too. But he began to talk about subjects like, just as Jonah was in the belly of the Leviathan for 3 days, even so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days. Now, when this subject comes up, if it does at all, why is Christianity true? The usual American answer is very similar to that stupid hymn, "You ask me how I know he lives within my heart," which has nothing to do with anything in the New Testament, whatever.
Makes you feel so awful, though.
Yeah. And in principle, an answer like that is so subjective that it's absolutely impossible for the non-Christian to whom you're talking to check it out as to whether it's true, because it's inside of you. Rather, what we're called to do is to build an objective case, something outside of our livers that the non-Christian can go to and test whether it's sound or not, good argument or not. So the calling of a Christian apologist is, first of all, to talk with people with their objections as to an objective case that the gospel actually is true. And the apologist's goal is really to get somebody to the point where the dentist says to his wife, "You know, honey, I think this stuff just might be true." That's the goal. We can't convert anybody. All we can do is bring them to the point where they say, "Gosh, I think this might be true." Pretty short introduction, but that'll give you the basic idea.
Yeah. Adam, when you're asked to go teach apologetics at various church, which you're asked to do several times throughout the year, and you have that in your head that, hey, I'm going to give them a basic introduction to apologetics. What's in your head that you're going to share with them when you go?
Well, I start by defining it just like Dr. Rosenblatt did, and emphasizing this is not something that was invented 200-300 years ago in the modern era, or it's rooted in the biblical text. 1 Peter 3:15. There are examples even in the New Testament. In many ways, many of those documents have apologetic intent. Think John chapter 20, where he says these things have been written so that you might believe.
Right.
Yep.
Even in the Lutheran Study Bible, whoever wrote the introduction to the Gospels portion, I don't know who it was, but they did. There's a marvelous paragraph where he explains that the Gospels were written so that the readers could see the case for Jesus, see that there was a case. There are eyewitness accounts for Jesus, that the Gospels were designed or written to convince people to believe the gospel was true.
Well, and Paul essentially says as much in 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 6, right? When he's referring to what you know from the scriptures, that Christ was died, that he was buried, that he rose on the third day, that it was attested to by witnesses more than 501 times. I mean, he's essentially saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And he got reactions from some of his hearers who said, "Paul, you almost convinced me to become a Christian."
Yeah, that's Acts 26, right? King Agrippa, I think.
Right.
And Paul, your great learning has made you mad.
Yeah,
you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Would you, in so short a time, think you could convince King Agrippa that to become a Christian? And Paul responds. His response is marvelous. I wish I could convince all of you to become Christians, because as the King himself knows, this is 26, verse 26. What I'm talking about the death and the resurrection did not happen in a corner.
Yep.
It's
Right.
something that happened outside of us, not in our heart or our livers. It happened in real time, real space, and can be checked out.
Yep.
Right. 1 Corinthians 15:17. Right. If Christ be not raised, we're of all men most miserable.
Yeah, you find the famous case of apologetics is Paul at Mars Hill, or
Sure.
at least one of them.
Sure.
And unfortunately, Luke only had a scroll. You wonder what Paul could talk at great length. People fall out of window. They fall asleep and fall out of windows when
Yeah.
But when he's talking to Stoics and Epicureans, primarily to Stoics, you wonder what that case looked like.
Yeah.
Right.
And he ends up Acts 17 verse 31, and it's like he's summarizing. He says, "And God has furnished proof."
Yeah.
That's the NASB translation, to all men that this is true by raising his son from the dead.
Yeah.
So apologetics is very much, it's a biblical discipline. It's David Scare at Fort Wayne Seminary, in fact, wrote an article entitled "Apologetics: A Biblical and Necessary Task."
Good for him.
That's in the Mansky Festschrift, and
Good for
it's a
David.
great little article.
Good.
So it's biblical and it's historical in that if you were to take, before the printing press, if you were to take all the things that Christians wrote after the New Testament, from the first century forward, and divide the things up into genres, a good chunk of that would be you could put in the genre of apologetic. I mean, the early church, it's the first church historian, past Luke, Eusebius, who describes that the second and third century Christian authors as the apologists. He's the one who gives us that sort of title, if you will.
Yeah.
And the greats, Augustine with the City of God, especially. Jump into the Middle Ages, whether you like him or not, he still was a great apologist. Thomas Aquinas,
Sure.
Even Luther. There's a lot of Lutherans who, and I do this a lot at Lutheran churches, because the assumption is, because they've probably heard somebody quote Luther say something like, "Reason is the devil's whore,"
Yeah.
right? And they assume, reasons or Lutherans don't do this stuff.
Yep.
Never mind that Luther says all sorts of other things about reason. Think small catechism explanation of Article 1. God has created me with my reason and my strength and still preserves them. But then if you look at Luther, back in the old days, it was 2000, I think, when I wrote my my master's thesis for you, I tried to show that Luther himself engaged in apologetics with the Jews, especially his earlier writings, before he gets a little nasty. But then his stuff on the Turks.
Yep.
He was very much concerned that Christians be able to defend their faith before hostile non-Christian audiences. And that included, in his day, Jews and Turks. In his, if I can keep going on,
go.
In his great Galatians commentary, which is one of the best things he wrote, I think. Early on, it's somewhere when I think he's introducing the books, in the first dozen pages or so, he says, and I don't know what he's commenting on, but he says when the Christian has to engage in controversy with the Jew, the Turk, the sectarian, and the Epicurean. The Epicurean in his day is the sort of the agnostic. It's the Renaissance guys down in Italy who are kind of aloof of whether you can count on special revelation. They're moving more towards a kind of a natural knowledge, and even then they're not so convinced. He says, when you engage in controversy with these people, they don't care about the external trappings of the church and the history of the church and the clergy and so on. When you engage in these people, you have to be as wise and subtle as a controversialist as possible, because then you're in a different area. You're on different grounds speaking about the gospel when you're amongst non-Christians. So it's not what I would argue what he's saying there is that you can't just quote the Bible to the atheist.
Yep.
We wish that were true, but you just, you can, of course, but don't expect that it's going to be a winsome argument.
Yeah.
So you find this in Luther, you find this as you mentioned, I think it was in maybe we were talking before the show, the early Lutheran dogmaticians, late 16th through the 18th century, they did apologetics as sort of their prolegomena.
Yeah.
The introduction to their systematic theology.
Yeah.
And you find it, ever since. So it's I at churches I emphasize that regardless of what you've heard from somebody who's just quoted a cliche, there's a long track record of Lutheran apologists. There's a guy, 19th century Lutheran, who was part of what some call the neo-confessional revival in Germany. These are guys who are done with sort of the unionism between Lutherans and Reformed. They're done with the sort of the secularizing of the church, and they begin kind of a reform of the church to push it in a more confessional, historic Lutheran direction. Ernst Hengstenberg would be one of the fathers of this, fairly famous name. One of his students or his disciples of some sort was a man named Otto Zockler.
Wrote the history.
Yeah, he wrote a huge history, much better than Avery Dulles' history of apologetics.
Absolutely. Do we have a translation of that?
No, just bits and
Doggone it.
pieces of it. Maybe Scott can do that in his spare time.
But anyway,
Scott struggles with finishing his lengthened
did
translations.
exist. And for most people, it's worth mentioning the apologist of the 20th century for the English-speaking world was C.S. Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the reasons millions of people buy his books is because he, unlike the clergy of almost any denomination, brings up arguments against unbelief and for the truth of the gospel.
Right.
Now, that's not the only reason people buy Lewis, but it's a major one.
Sure.
Because they can't find a priest or pastor who will offer arguments for them on the side of the truth of the gospel. In our circles, it's Dr. Montgomery. But he'll go down as second only to C.S. Lewis in the whole century.
And Lewis does it even through his fiction. It's amazing.
Yeah, he does it in Narnia.
It's just amazing. All right, we need to take a break, unfortunately. But here's the thing. For the listener,
I'm just getting going.
I know, Adam, you're knocking it out of the park today. For the listener, we are not going to get into a particular apologetic method today. We are simply doing some introductions. We'll lead off after the break with I have a couple simple questions, and then I need to encourage you to stay tuned for future episodes, because in future episodes in this series is where we'll break down the particular arguments. We'll actually give you the meat of this topic instead of an introduction. But what we're trying to do today is provide you with some context to why this series is probably, the most important thing that we'll do in this podcast for today's Christian as they're engaging the world. So we'll start out after the break with a question on apologetic urgency and why is this so urgent today. All right? All right. Time for a quick advertisement.
Welcome to our break. As usual, even though we're doing kind of a special episode about the show, we're going to do an advertisement for a book, but this time it's tying in extremely well into the topic. We're going to do History, Law, and Christianity. It's Dr. Montgomery's kind of introductory work, I would say, to apologetics, and Dr. Rosenblatt's going to talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, the background to it was that Avram Stroll of the Department of Philosophy at UCSD had given a nationwide presentation in Canada on the fact that everything in Christianity was not much higher than the tooth fairy in its epistemic status. And InterVarsity in British Columbia then requested that C.S. Lewis came over to rebut. Lewis wrote back to IV and said, "I think my traveling days are over." He had just had a heart attack. And so then they went to Waterloo in Canada, where Dr. Montgomery was in the history department, and cajoled him into answering again on national Canadian television what Stroll had preached or taught or lectured. That meant that it was not Dr. Montgomery's usual style to overwhelm everybody with footnotes. It was an oral address. What he did there was published a little earlier in InterVarsity's His magazine. Basically what he does is to do an argument starting from the Gospels as historical material, not as inspired. That comes later. but just as history writing, and to see whether they can vindicate themselves at all in the open arena of academic discourse. From that defense of the historical reliability of the Gospels, he goes to the claims Christ made. And for many people, that might have been the first they'd ever heard of them. But anyway, he did them. His claims, no wonder the Jews were fit to be tied. He was talking as if he were Yahweh,
Right.
standing right in front of them.
Right.
No wonder they went through the roof. But he did. And he did it in more ways than one, over and over and over and over again. Now, anybody can do that sort of thing. Most of the people who do it are in mental wards, and they're on Thorazine. So it is not self-defending, but he wanted to lay that as the groundwork. This is what he claimed to be, and he claimed this about what his death would do. Next section he does on what was Jesus' view of the Old Testament text, and later on, what was Jesus' view of the New Testament? And you say, that's batty. There was no New Testament. He knew that they were going to write it. They didn't know it. And he put his imprimatur, or his stamp of approval, on what was apostolically authored, or close associates of the apostles. As on the same level, Peter recognizes this. He calls it the Scriptures, what Paul was writing, so that the whole case actually ends up being an objective case. How so? Well, if Jesus was evidencing who he was by his miracles at will, and then pointing to his resurrection from the dead, the way to break Christianity is to argue that he wasn't they didn't rise, or that the miracle stories are counterfeits. So he covers those bases. It's an introductory, orally delivered argument put into book form, and later added a section on law, that the gospel is true, not what Stroll was saying. It's a wonderful short intro. I don't know how many copies of that thing I've given away.
It's one of, I would say, probably the most accessible books we sell at 1517, especially because it's only, right now on the store, $9.95. And when we go out to events and stuff like that, when speakers have them with them, they're $10 as well. And so it's really easy to pick up. It's at shop.1517legacy.com. You can grab that book. Yeah, it's really easy to read, too. It's really easy to put on your shelf. And like you said, it's also easy to give away because of how small and I would say easy to read it is. You can hand it to somebody who's questioning these things.
Let me throw in an ad for another one, though it sounds overwhelming on first hearing. The title is Tractatus Logico-Theologicus.
Life-changing.
Yeah, this
It is.
It's a life-changing.
Yeah, it's his magnum opus, and it's in outline form. It isn't Harvard outline form, but it's in the numerical outline form, the same as Wittgenstein's Tractatus was. But even with a title like that, I think if you tried that book, our listeners, you would be amazed at how simple it is to read.
Yeah, it's just 1, 2, 3. I mean, it's got great points. It's like one line points. That is phenomenal.
So don't be frightened by the title.
Yeah.
That's also available on the store. I will keep links to both there. Both worth your time. One more of a traditional little book, and one definitely an amazing, like you said, outline style. But there's a ton of information there, just totally accessible.
Yeah.
And I think Craig Parton's Religion on Trial is a...
Yes.
If the Tractatus, if you get it and you look at it and you're overwhelmed, if you get the Religion on Trial, it follows the Tractatus, but it's put in very simple terms.
Yes.
So, I don't know who publishes that. But,
CPH. Yeah.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, they'll never... Craig will never ask him to do another, but they did that one. I had to be on the phone with the editor on that one saying, don't change the title. He wanted to change it to Why I'm a Lutheran.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
No.
Yeah.
But I think that's That's the other book here. The Defense Never Rests,
Yes,
right?
that's-
okay.
that's the
Religion
one.
at Trial might be Wittgenstock, but
Okay,
it's
that's
it
right.
was written. I think he told me to make the Tractatus
Accessible.
very accessible,
Yeah.
so that you could read that and then read the Tractatus.
Yep.
And get the
Yeah, I was-
nitty-gritty details.
yeah, it's The Defense Never Rests.
yeah. That's a good book.
Concordia published,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they wanted to change the title, so I had to be on the phone saying, "Look, this goes outside Lutheran circles. I know you're not familiar with that, but trust me, don't change it into something linked only to his denomination."
Yeah.
And I will link. I'll link all three of those there. So the two that we sell at 1517, and then I'll link both of Parton's books there as well.
Religion on Trial is Wittgenstock.
He had left CPH.
So, Rod and Adam, I just read a great little draft of an essay by Rod, and it reminded me to ask a particular question. Is there a particular apologetic urgency that we see today? Today, by today, not this day, but by today, I mean sort of in our current time period, in which we now live. Is there a particular urgency here? I think there might be.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are questions that are stupid questions. That might be one of them. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. There's a great essay on this by Dr. Montgomery on Christian apologetics in the 21st century.
Yeah.
You could just go online and type that title in, and you'll go to his web page and get the link. But you're just asking rhetorically, kind of. Absolutely, we live in a very increasingly pluralistic society where the religious claims out there have multiplied, I don't know, 100-fold. It used to be that the scandal was the Reformed who didn't believe in the real presence in the Lord's Supper. Now you've got an atheists aplenty. Obviously, the agnostics are all over. You've got Muslims who are increasing their presence tremendously and getting a lot of media airtime. You've got I don't know if a secular worldview is the right way of describing it,
It'll
but this progressivist secularist worldview that is not aloof to Christianity, but is deeply opposed to it,
Yep.
and they happen to enjoy a lot of political power.
Yep.
So there's, at every corner.
And the other thing I'd bring up is that we're in an era when the Christian church is not training its laity on how in conversation to say anything negative or positive, either one.
Yeah.
That's got to be fixed in a
Right.
time of great skepticism, and we're in one. Sorry, Adam.
Oh, I'd add to that the reality that, and you touched on it a little bit in this little draft that you sent me last night, that the idea of truth or available truth or being confident in some sort of truth is almost absent.
From the universities, it's almost disappeared.
And even in the modern vernacular, which makes the apologetic task for today probably not unique within the history of Christianity, but unique for sort of our available recent past, right? So what we're used to dialoguing about.
Yeah. If you take a look at the history of Western Phil, you find that some of the greatest representatives did what they did up against the skeptics of their day. People I don't especially like, but I can see why they were doing what they were doing. Not just John Locke, but I'd add Descartes and Kant. They were going up against those who said there's no such thing as knowing.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's the parallel in the history of Western Phil. They knew that was trouble. Nobody knows anything about anything.
Right.
And I think what apologetics does, it does a lot of things. One, culturally, I think probably, while they might not put it this way, a lot of people see Christianity as just another cleverly devised myth.
Yep.
Right.
Epistemologically, on the basis of being able to check it out and so on, it the way it's articulated, it's just like Buddhism or Hinduism. You just got to believe it. You got to feel it or whatever.
Right.
So in the apologetic task, what the apologist does is what is written in 2 Peter, it demonstrates that this is not a cleverly devised myth. All those other ones out there might be, in fact are, but this isn't. It's grounded in historic fact.
Which is expressly unique to Christianity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is.
Which makes it so interesting when it's abandoned. I mean,
Yeah.
we often like, I think even on apologetics are fighting other Christians because they're doing so much against this, so much with feeling, so much with this kind of the arbitrary air, making it like Buddhism or, Islam, anything like that.
Yeah, in our day, unfortunately, because of the work of postmodernist professors at almost all universities, first of all, we have to say something about whether there's knowledge about anything. I never imagined that when I was young, but here we are.
And then you get, there's a trend within Christianity in, it cuts across, I think, denominational or confessional lines where thinkers, theologians are toy with postmodern theory. I think there's a book out there called Who's Afraid of Postmodernism, written by James K.A. Smith. I think he goes by Jimmy. He's a brilliant thinker and writer. He's written a lot of things on different topics, but in Who's Afraid of Postmodernism, he says something in the first chapter to the fact that the church is an apologetic for Christianity. The church, because of its alternate polity and its alternate lifestyle, so to speak, is a defense of the gospel. And you go, what? And he said, he doesn't use these words, but he says the churches or Christians are largely absolved of trying to demonstrate the truth of Christianity.
Oh, gosh.
So you get that. There's a book, another one by, I think, InterVarsity Press put this out, Christian Apologetics and Postmodern Christian Apologetics or something like that. And there's a chapter in there with the title, There's No Such Thing as Objective Truth, and It's a Good Thing Too.
Oh, yes, I've seen that.
Wow.
So you get a lot, I mean, I'm not naming names, but in our own circles, you got people who flirt with this postmodern theory.
Yep.
For different reasons.
Yep. But it's corrosive anyway.
Absolutely. It not just hampers, but it really it cripples your ability to make any sort of objective case.
Sure.
And to articulate Christianity as something distinct.
I think of John Henry Cardinal Newman, the greatest misunderstander of Luther in Western history. John Henry Cardinal Newman had the fight that the university should have theology as a department. He lost that fight, but he was right. Why would it be that you would disqualify the discipline? Very simple, because the rest of the university would say, we don't think you have any knowledge. Not real knowledge. That's what Newman was up against.
Right, and he makes a great argument. That's in the idea of the university.
Idea of the university.
He makes a great argument from the idea that the stated goal of the university is to educate under universal knowledge, and that how can you do such a thing if you don't discuss the one topic that touches universally everybody?
Francis Schaeffer used to say that Christians were the last ones in the Western world who believed that knowledge was one. I used to wonder what professors talked about when I was at the university. I'd look at the faculty club and I thought, wow, what goes on in there? Well, what really went on in there was that they talked about their flowers, their gardens, their... Why? Because the split between the disciplines was now so great that you couldn't talk across lines. That's why Schaeffer said what he said. You are the last hope that there's such a thing as the unity of knowledge. You're it.
So the last thing I want to discuss before we move on is this can be a scary idea for the everyday person, for the laity, and even sometimes for the pastor to think that, hey, I have to go, I'm called upon. You even said it's an imperative in 1 Peter, right? That it's imperative that I do apologetics. How the heck do I do this? I don't have training in philosophy. I don't have that particular training in apologetics. What the heck do I do?
Amazingly, it doesn't require going and getting another degree in it. Not really. An amazing majority of apologetic work is giving away material that's really good.
You know, when you say that, because I go out and teach just real basic apologetics, and when you say that to an audience, they're almost universally astonished.
Yeah.
Because even at that, I sometimes have to clarify that this doesn't mean that you have to both read the material and master the material
Right.
before you hand it out.
Right.
But simply be familiar with it enough to know that it might be helpful in a particular instance to a particular person.
Exactly. And it can be books usually, but it can even be essays that are clearly written and argued well. I come from 3 out of 4 years in my college days, hard sciences. I was in math and dissecting crabs when other people were learning about Greece and Rome. But if you do it evidentially, which we're going to recommend in detail in the coming podcasts, if you do it evidentially, guess what? It invites the scientist in. The others don't. They close the circle, and you just have to decide before ever entering that you're going to grant the Bible's the holy inspired word of God. That rules the scientist out. But if we'll offer arguments and not write them ourselves, find really good sources where the thing is argued inductively, that is, by facts individually and beginning very slowly to generalize, the scientist says, then I'm invited in, right? And the answer is, you sure are. Because history is the sloughing off of the empirical present.
Right. I do a little lecture series called The Epistemology of Theology, and at the very end of that little series, I make a comparison between the theological method and the hypothetical deductive method used by biologists, really, to acquire knowledge, because it's the theological method, if it's done according, evidentially, right?
Yeah.
If it's done inductively, like it should be, is so similar to how scientists are supposed to acquire knowledge themselves about their field.
Yeah, Caleb put in Montgomery, The Theologian's Craft. One of the best things he ever wrote.
Yeah.
Delivered to a whole auditorium of scientists in Canada. The Theologian's Craft.
You got it. I will highlight in the show notes that this is a good episode for this. There's going to be a lot of material for people to check out, which is just really fun. I love being able to give all this stuff to the listeners, because this is just another way that they can interact with it all and really benefit from the show.
And if they get excited, and before we do the next episode, if they get excited and they want to do some pre-reading, really we don't even have to recommend particular books that we carry at 1517 Legacy, because most of our catalog today is apologetically minded. They could simply go to the store, which I think is shop at 1517legacy.com or shop.1517legacy.com. I know you might not say it, but I'd even say that your book is in a kind of a broad sense an apologetic work. Oh, I would. Yeah, that was actually one of the goals. But it's a little more. I hate to use the word nuance, but it's a little more nuanced.
Oh, I think it's through the last topic that we talked about, through vocation. It's apologetic through vocation of Father.
So great.
You know that stupid question thing was a joke, right? I feel like
no, I know. It's cool.
All right,
I have
great.
a bad sense of humor.
A great episode. If you're still listening, I hope you are all the way to the end. I don't know how many people check out halfway through, but go.
Nobody. Our listeners are loyal.
Yeah.
Caleb, I'm surprised you would even suggest such a thing.
Oh man, I'm in trouble. Now everybody's going to send me hate mail.
Oh God.
So please don't spam the Thinking Fellows at 1517.
How would we do that? Because Adam and I might take a few minutes and do that.
You could do it anonymously through our website. You can contact us on the website. This is one of the things I want to highlight. So if you haven't visited the website, like I talked about at the beginning, you can go to our website. You can actually talk with us directly there. There is there's like a little section where you can email us from there if you forget, thinkingfellows at 1517legacy.com. Keep in mind that all of those go to me, and then I send them out to the various fellows as they apply. As if you have a question about the show, I'll usually try to send it to the fellow with the most experience in that particular field. If it's just a general comment about the show or something like that, I might take a swing at it also. So just go ahead and send those our way. You can also send me Facebook messages. I try to reply within like a couple hours unless I'm like driving or something. I know people send Thinking Fellows messages to us all the time, and sometimes they get a little backlog because I'm doing something else. But when my phone dings, I usually try to answer it, try to interact with our listeners as much as possible.
We're so happy you do that for us.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I do want to say that sometimes we'll respond to your comment or your question by doing a show too. We'll one of the next shows we'll record will be just that. We're responding to a lengthy email we got from a listener about a current controversy going on, and more in evangelicalism and in Calvinism than in Lutheranism. But we'll have a guest on to help us work through that. We may be a little out of our wheelhouse on that, but we're doing our best to try to take the listener seriously, and when they have a question, ask us to do a little bit more to try to do just that.
Another thing before we quit, I'm going to attempt to talk to Steve Burns or my son to put up under freebies on our site scans of apologetic articles from the old His magazine. Some of those are just outstanding. And if the Lutherans aren't going to do it, then we'll go to places where it is being done. Some of them are by Dr. Montgomery. The old His magazine, I think now it's kaput. But I scanned some of those articles, and I want to give them away to people for free.
I think we're doing that. We're in the process of making the page right now.
Okay.
Yep.
Think of Paul Little. I was his TA, the late Paul Little. An article called "What Non-Christians Ask."
Those predictable questions.
Absolutely.
Like 6 of them or something.
He used to say, he preached my ordination. He used to say, I can predict with 96% accuracy what's going to be asked of me at a fraternity or sorority after dinner if I give a presentation. Now, he wasn't saying he was so brilliant. He was saying anybody could do this. The same 12 questions come up again and again and again and again and again and again and again.
Well, part of what you can say is that there just aren't that many questions, right?
Yeah,
And at the end of the day,
he would say that.
6. And that it's not that someone is being arrogant by saying I can predict what's going to be asked.
No,
it's just that if you go out and do this enough,
Same thing.
you get the same thing,
Yeah.
and it's not. It's also not implying that the people asking those questions that those questions aren't legitimate or that they're not unique to them,
Right.
Because they would absolutely have no frame of reference to know that that's a common question.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. Or I've got an expert here. I'm going to ask him.
Right.
All right, I think this is a great jumping point for us to hop into our apologetics topics. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll catch you next time.